Everyone in my family thought I was overreacting. Then the certified mail arrived at my brother's door and nobody said that anymore. Background and opening. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. I'm not the type to air family drama publicly, but after everything that happened over the last 4 months, I feel like I owe it to myself, and maybe to someone else out there in a similar situation, to put it all down somewhere. So here it is. My name is Daniel. I'm 41, live in Portland, Oregon, and I recently went through what I can only describe as a calculated dismantling of my autonomy by the one person in my family who has spent his entire life convinced he's smarter than everyone else in the room. My brother is Marcus. He's 45, recently semi-retired after selling a small chain of auto parts franchises he'd built up over 15 years, and he has never, not once in the 41 years I've known him, been able to leave well enough alone when it comes to other people's business. Especially mine. Some background. Our father passed away 3 years ago, and the family dynamics shifted dramatically after that. Dad was a quiet, steady man who had a way of absorbing Marcus's controlling tendencies without letting them spill too far. Once he was gone, Marcus stepped into what he clearly believed was a natural succession. He became the patriarch, the decision-maker, the man with the plan. Our mother, Eleanor, is 72 and has always found it easier to agree with Marcus than to push back. Our younger sister, Patrice, lives in Denver and keeps a healthy geographic distance for reasons that will probably feel obvious by the end of this. I had been living in my condo, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District, for 9 years. I bought it for $310,000 back when the neighborhood was still finding itself, put money into renovating the kitchen and both bathrooms, and by the time I decided to sell, comparable units were closing somewhere between $580,000 and $620,000. It wasn't just an apartment. It was the first major thing I'd ever owned outright, the first grown-up decision I'd made entirely on my own terms, and selling it was supposed to mark a new chapter. I'd accepted a position in Austin and was planning to buy something with a yard, maybe finally get a dog. I told Marcus in passing at our mother's birthday dinner in early November. Casual mention. I was excited. It was good news. That was my first mistake. Part 1. The help. I didn't realize anything was wrong until mid-November, when a colleague of mine named Brian mentioned he'd run into a man outside my building who'd introduced himself as Daniel's brother and told Brian, who'd expressed interest in the listing after I'd casually mentioned it at work, that the unit had significant moisture issues behind the master bath tile and that the HOA was in the middle of a special assessment that could run 6 figures. Neither of those things was true. The moisture issue. There was none. I had the unit inspected 18 months prior when I was considering a refinance. Clean report. The HOA special assessment? The building had completed a roof replacement 2 years ago, fully funded through reserves. The HOA was in excellent financial health. I'd pulled the documents myself. I called Brian immediately. He was apologetic and a little awkward. Look, Dan, I figured it was your brother, so I assumed he knew what he was talking about. I'm not going to lie, it put me off. I was going to bring my wife this weekend. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still for about 10 minutes. I didn't call Marcus right away. I've had enough history with him to know that confronting him directly accomplishes nothing except a lecture about how I'm too sensitive, how he was only trying to help, and how I clearly don't understand how real estate transactions work. Marcus, despite having sold franchises, has a talent for retroactively framing every overreach as a generous act that I should have been grateful for. Instead, I called my listing agent, a woman named Sandra Kowalski, who I'd met at an open house 2 years prior and had developed a solid professional relationship with. I had spoken with Sandra about the sale, toured the unit with her, and we were in the late stages of formalizing our agreement. I asked her directly if she'd had any contact with a man named Marcus. There was a pause. Daniel, she said carefully, I was actually going to call you today. That pause, and those 7 words, are the moment this story truly begins. Part 2. The agreement. Sandra explained it to me in measured professional terms, but the facts were stark. 4 days earlier, a man identifying himself as my representative had contacted a real estate agency called Northgate Realty Group, which operates out of a Lake Oswego office and covers a substantial portion of the Portland metro market. This man, Marcus, had met with an agent named Kevin Harlow and signed a 60-day exclusive listing agreement. The agreement named me as the seller. It listed the property address. It carried what appeared to be my signature. Kevin sent me the document this morning because I'd already reached out to him about a potential conflict on the same property, Sandra said. He didn't realize what had happened. He thought you'd switched agents. Sandra, I said very slowly, I did not sign that agreement. I know, she said. I believe you. And Kevin is going to need to hear that directly. I asked her to send me a copy of the document. She did. I opened it on my laptop and stared at the signature line. It was a credible forgery, someone who'd clearly practiced. The M in my last name was slightly off, the D in Daniel a little too rounded, but if you weren't looking for it, you might not notice. My brother had forged my signature on a real estate listing agreement. Let me say that again because I need it to land. My brother forged my signature on a legally binding real estate contract. I closed the laptop. I went to my kitchen, made coffee I didn't drink, and then I did something Marcus would never expect from me. I didn't call him. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Patrice to vent. Instead, I opened my notes app and started writing down every fact I knew, every date, every name, everything Brian had told me, everything Sandra had said. I wrote for 45 minutes. Then I called a real estate attorney. Part 3, Building the Case. Her name was Rebecca Holt, and she came recommended by a friend who'd used her during a contentious property dispute 2 years earlier. I reached her assistant that afternoon, explained the situation in general terms, and had an appointment for the following morning. Rebecca was methodical in a way that I found immediately reassuring. She was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, with an office full of neatly labeled binders and the kind of focused calm that comes from having spent decades in rooms where everyone else is panicking. I laid out everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down and said, "Okay, let's separate the issues, because you have several of them." The issues, as she framed them. First, the forged signature. This was potentially fraud. Depending on how the document was executed and what Marcus's intent could be demonstrated to be, it could rise to the level of criminal conduct. At minimum, it was civil fraud and forgery. Second, the false statements made to prospective buyers. What Marcus had told Brian constituted tortious interference with a prospective economic advantage, a real legal cause of action in Oregon. If there had been other buyers, and there had been, then the scope of that interference was broader. Third, the listing agreement with Northgate Realty. Even if voidable, and Rebecca believed it was clearly voidable given the forged signature, it created a cloud on my ability to sell freely. Northgate could theoretically claim a commission if the property sold during or shortly after their window, depending on how their agreement was written. "We need 3 things, Rebecca said. Documentation, witnesses, and timeline. Do you have any of this in writing?" I did. I had Sandra's email forwarding the Northgate document. I had a text thread with Brian where he described the conversation with a man outside my building. I had my original communication records with Sandra establishing our prior relationship and the fact that no other agent had been engaged. "Good," Rebecca said. "Don't contact your brother. Not yet. Let me reach out to Northgate first." I asked her why. She gave me a small, careful smile. "Because right now, Kevin Harlow doesn't fully understand that he may have facilitated a fraud. Once he does, he's going to be very cooperative. And a cooperative agent at Northgate is more useful to you right now than a panicked brother." I walked out of that office with a legal engagement letter, a clear plan, and something I hadn't felt since Brian's phone call, a sense of control. Update 1. Northgate cooperates. Rebecca moved quickly. Within 2 business days, she had spoken directly with Northgate's managing broker, a woman named Diane Forsyth, and shared the documentation establishing that the signature on their agreement was forged. She also provided a brief summary of the timeline, including the date Marcus had met with Kevin Harlow and the dates of my prior communications with Sandra establishing that I had not authorized any other representation. Diane Forsyth, to her credit, handled it professionally. She pulled the Northgate agreement immediately and confirmed in writing to Rebecca that it was null and void, that the agency would make no claim against my property based on that agreement, and that Kevin Harlow would be available to provide a sworn statement if needed. Kevin, it turned out, had met with Marcus at a coffee shop in Lake Oswego, not at Northgate's office. He'd been told that I was too busy to come in person and had authorized my brother to handle the paperwork. Kevin had not verified my identity through any independent documentation. He'd accepted a state ID that Marcus had shown him, presumably his own, though Kevin had not retained a copy, and proceeded on the assumption of good faith. Kevin was embarrassed and cooperative. He provided Rebecca with a detailed written account of the meeting, including Marcus's physical description, the vehicle he'd arrived in, and several specific things Marcus had said about my relocation timeline and the property's characteristics, all of which Kevin could corroborate he'd been told by this man claiming to represent me. Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the Oregon Real Estate Agency on Kevin's behalf, not against Kevin, but documenting the fraudulent circumstances through which the agreement had been obtained. She also sent a formal letter of notice to Marcus, via certified mail, to his home address in Tigard. The letter was precise. It did not accuse. It documented. It stated that an agreement bearing a disputed signature had been submitted to Northgate Realty, that the owner of the property had not authorized such agreement, that the Oregon Real Estate Agency had been notified, and that the property owner was preserving all legal rights related to this matter. It requested, in neutral terms, that Marcus provide within 10 days any documentation supporting his authority to act as agent for Daniel. He did not respond within 10 days. He responded in 3, by phone, to me. Update 2. The phone call. I knew he would call me directly before responding to Rebecca. Marcus has never in his life responded to a formal process when he could first attempt to reframe the situation in a personal conversation. He called on a Tuesday evening, and I let it go to voicemail. His message was 18 minutes long. I will summarize. He was not apologetic. He was indignant. He said he had stepped in because I clearly had no idea what I was doing, that Sandra Kowalski was not the right agent for a property like mine, that the price point she'd suggested was leaving money on the table, and that Kevin Harlow at Northgate had a better track record in high-value Pearl District units. He said the people he'd spoken to who were looking at the unit didn't seem serious. He said the moisture issue and HOA comments were meant to test their commitment, a strategy he'd read about somewhere that was apparently meant to filter out weak buyers. He said, and I want to quote this as accurately as I can from memory, "You should be thanking me, Daniel. I'm doing the work you don't have the experience to do yourself. Dad would have done the same thing." That last sentence. I replayed it twice. Then I forwarded the voicemail to Rebecca. She called me the next morning. "He just explained his intent and his methods on a recorded voicemail," she said. "I want you to know that this is genuinely helpful." I asked her what the next step was. "You're going to call him back," she said. "Short, calm, neutral. You're going to tell him you received his message, that you appreciate his concern, and that all further communication regarding the property should go through your attorney. That's all. Don't engage with the substance. Don't argue." I did exactly that. It took 45 seconds. Marcus started talking over me almost immediately, but I repeated the line twice, said goodbye, and hung up. He called back 4 times that evening. I didn't answer. He left 2 more voicemails, both of which I forwarded to Rebecca without listening to them in full. She listened to them. She told me they were, quote, very useful. In the meantime, I had reached back out to Brian. Brian, it turned out, was still interested. He brought his wife, Cheryl, to see the unit the following Saturday. They loved it. They made an offer at $597,000 4 days later. Update 3, the counteroffer, the close, and Marcus finds out. Sandra handled the offer beautifully. We countered at $609,500. Brian and Cheryl came back at $605,000. We accepted. Inspection was clean. The moisture issue that had never existed continued to not exist. The HOA documents were reviewed by their agent, who confirmed the financials were in excellent shape. We were on track to close in 32 days. Marcus found out about the pending sale not from me, but from our mother. I had told Eleanor in a brief phone call that the apartment was under contract and that things were moving forward well. I mentioned, gently, that I'd had to involve an attorney because of some complications that had come up. I didn't specify. I didn't need to. Eleanor, being Eleanor, mentioned it to Marcus within the hour. He called me again. I didn't answer. He called Patrice. Patrice called me. "Daniel," she said, "what is going on? Marcus is absolutely losing it." I told Patrice the truth. All of it. The false statements to Brian. The forged listing agreement. The voicemails. The attorney. All of it. There was a long silence. "I'm not surprised," she finally said. "I want you to know that. I'm not defending him and I'm not surprised." Patrice, to her enormous credit, did not get in the middle. She told Marcus she'd spoken to me and that he needed to stop contacting me directly. She told him that what he described as helping had legal implications that he needed to take seriously. She told him she loved him but that she wasn't going to tell him what he wanted to hear. He called her selfish. She hung up. Meanwhile, Rebecca had been in quiet, professional communication with a real estate litigation specialist, a colleague of hers who handled the more pointed end of property fraud cases. Together, they had prepared a civil complaint, ready to file, laying out the tortious interference claim and the forgery. The complaint named Marcus by name. It sought damages covering my attorney's fees, the documented lost sale opportunity. We had a rough estimate of Brian's initial offer compared to market. The delay had cost us at minimum several weeks and potentially one buyer entirely, depending on how we framed it, and punitive damages related to the fraud. Rebecca told me I did not have to file. "The complaint is a tool," she said. "We use it when and if we need to. Right now, its existence is enough." What she meant was, she was going to send Marcus a letter informing him that the complaint was prepared, that it would be filed unless he responded in writing within 15 days acknowledging that the agreement was unauthorized, agreeing not to interfere further in any way with the sale or any future sale of the property, and agreeing to reimburse my attorney's fees to date, which totaled $3,800. Marcus received that letter on a Thursday. By the following Monday, his own attorney had called Rebecca. Update 4. Marcus's attorney and the agreement. His attorney was a man named Gerald Park, a general practice lawyer based in Tigard who'd apparently helped Marcus with some of his franchise paperwork years ago. Gerald was polite, but not particularly intimidating. Rebecca said later he seemed more uncomfortable than aggressive, which she took as a sign that he'd told Marcus directly that the situation was serious and Marcus had not fully believed him until that moment. The negotiation took about 10 days. I was not party to the direct conversations. Rebecca handled everything, but she kept me informed at each step. Marcus's initial position, communicated through Gerald, was that he had acted in good faith as a family member assisting with a sale, that the signature issue was a misunderstanding, and that no damages had occurred because the sale was now proceeding. Rebecca's response to that, in professional summary: the signature issue was not a misunderstanding, it was either deliberate forgery or reckless misrepresentation, both of which carried civil liability. Damages had occurred in the form of lost buyer opportunity and legal fees. The Oregon Real Estate Agency complaint was filed and ongoing. And the civil complaint was ready. Gerald came back with a counter. Marcus would acknowledge unauthorized action, not forgery, not fraud, just unauthorized action, would agree to no further involvement in any sale or property decision of mine without explicit written consent, and would pay $2,000 toward my legal fees. Rebecca declined and sent the final offer: acknowledge unauthorized action in writing, full attorney's fee reimbursement of $3,800, a formal written apology, not to be shared publicly, simply documented, and a notarized letter to the Oregon Real Estate Agency confirming that the agreement at Northgate was executed without authorization. There was a 48-hour silence. Then Gerald called back and said Marcus would agree to all of it. The documents were signed 11 days before my closing date. Resolution: the close, the quiet, and what comes after. I closed on the Pearl District unit on a cold Thursday morning in late January. Brian and Cheryl were lovely people. She was an architect, he worked in environmental consulting, and they had plans to knock down the wall between the second bedroom and the living area to create a studio space. I liked imagining that. I liked leaving the place to people who already had ideas for it. Sandra was at the closing. She had handled everything with grace and professionalism, and when it was done and we were standing in the title company's lobby, she shook my hand and said, "Congratulations. You kept your head through all of that." I told her I'd had help. The net sale figure, after fees and commissions, came to just over $583,000. Not quite the ceiling of what comparable units had sold for, but within range, and honestly, more than I'd let myself hope for when things were at their most complicated. Rebecca's fees, minus the $3,800 reimbursed by Marcus, came to another $2,100. I considered it a reasonable price for what I'd learned. The notarized letter Marcus sent to the Oregon Real Estate Agency is a matter of record. The Oregon REA investigation of the Northgate incident remains open as of this writing. I have no control over that, and I haven't tried to influence it either direction. Kevin Harlow continues working at Northgate and has, by all accounts, implemented stricter identity verification procedures for new listing agreements. I hold no ill will toward Kevin. He was deceived. The written acknowledgement from Marcus is in a folder on my laptop and also backed up on a cloud drive. I don't expect to need it. I don't plan to use it as leverage or share it. It exists because I needed it to exist. I needed the formal, documented recognition that what he did was wrong, that it was his action and not his authority, and that there are limits he cannot cross just because he has always believed himself to be above limits. The written apology, 4 sentences, formal, clearly drafted by Gerald and signed by Marcus, says that he acted without authorization, that his actions caused legal complications, and that he regrets the impact on my sale process. It does not say he is sorry in the way a person who has genuinely reflected on harm would be sorry. I know the difference. But it is signed. It is notarized. It is real in the way that matters legally, even if not emotionally. Reflection: what I took away from all of this. I've thought about Marcus a lot since closing. Not with anger, that phase passed somewhere around the second voicemail, but with something closer to a clear-eyed sadness. Marcus has always believed that love and control are the same thing. That caring about someone means knowing better than they do. That stepping in uninvited is a form of generosity if your intentions are good enough. He genuinely, I think, believed he was helping me. And that is the most disturbing part of the entire story. Not that he was malicious in a cold, calculated way, but that he was malicious in a warm, self-righteous way. He forged my name on a legal document and considered it an act of brotherly duty. That kind of distortion doesn't fix itself with a confrontation. It doesn't fix itself with an argument at the dinner table or a frank conversation that ends in a hug and a lesson learned. The only thing that had any real effect on Marcus was the arrival of formal, documented, legal consequence. Not my feelings. Not our mother's discomfort. Not Patrice's disappointment. Documents. Letters. An attorney who spoke a language he could not reframe. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward. Marcus has not called me since the settlement documents were signed. Our mother has called twice, and both times the calls have been careful and slightly awkward in the way calls are when there's a large obvious thing that nobody is naming. Patrice texts me occasionally, memes, mostly, and a picture of her new rescue dog, which I appreciated more than she probably knows. I am in Austin now. I have a small house with a yard in a neighborhood that gets actual spring weather in March. I have a dog, a 3-year-old mutt named Clifford, which is, I'll admit, an embarrassing name for a middle-aged man's dog, but he came with it and it suits him. I start my new position next week. I did not need my brother's help selling my apartment. I needed to trust my own instincts, hire people who knew what they were doing, and, when things went sideways, respond strategically rather than emotionally. The last part took some learning. I won't pretend it came naturally. My first instinct, when I found out what Marcus had done, was a flash of white-hot rage that I am glad nobody witnessed. But rage doesn't void forged agreements. Rage doesn't recover attorneys' fees. Rage doesn't produce notarized apologies or formal acknowledgments on file with a state regulatory agency. Strategy does. Patience does. Documentation does. If I could go back and give myself advice on the day Brian told me about the man outside my building, it would be simple. Write everything down immediately, call a lawyer before you call your brother, and never mistake silence for inaction. The quietest months of that ordeal were the most productive ones. Every time I didn't pick up Marcus's calls, I was doing something more useful than anything the conversation would have produced. I keep the folder with the documents not as a weapon, but as a reminder. A reminder that I handled something hard without losing myself. That I didn't become what he was trying to make me, either a grateful recipient of his control or a reactive, emotional foil for it. I was just a man selling his apartment. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. Edit. To everyone asking, yes, the Oregon REA process is separate from anything I did or asked for. I reported the facts as they happened. The agency makes its own determinations. I genuinely don't know what the outcome will be, and I'm okay with that. Edit 2. For the people saying I should have pushed for more financially, maybe. But the goal was never to bleed him dry. The goal was to close my sale, protect my property, and create a documented record of what happened. I think we got there. Edit 3. Clifford says hello.